Let's cover off dynamic blocks, folks, in Terraform. I'm going to cover off an example in Azure. The one you see in the official Terraform documentation here is AWS, but they're very similar, folks, okay? What we would use dynamic blocks for, folks, is where you've got a resource set up in Terraform that has a lot of repeatable nested blocks inside it. For example, a security rule, folks, inside a network security group. You could have multiple security rules, folks, and if you were to set up this resource and just continue setting up multiple security rules, this resource block could get massive inside your configuration and just be very hard to track, and it would look very untidy. And if you needed to then create more network security groups, then it can get out of control with the size of your actual Terraform config, folks. So that's one reason we would use dynamic blocks. Okay, so if we jump back to the dynamic block documentation, not to go down through everything, folks, but one takeaway as well is use the dynamic blocks sparingly. And what that means is it can get very hard to read and understand for someone else that could just come across your code and want to change something. And you could put dynamic blocks inside dynamic blocks and so on, but it could get out of control and very hard to read. I've seen occurrences of that, and I now understand them, and it took me a while. I actually had to start just from the ground up and start playing around with them myself, which I'll show you in a minute in VS Code, which I've done to understand them, folks. All right, so without further ado, let's look at my VS Code for a setup that's going to create a network security group and multiple rules, folks. So here we have it, folks, and just to remind you as well, I've shared this template for this Terraform configuration. If you go back through my previous videos, it's there, it's free to download from GitHub, and you can build upon this. I will again share this here configuration if you want to, use this for your own needs and cater it to your own needs, folks. Please do so. I've commented the life out of this here config file to create this network security group, and you can use these example as well. They're not any security risks, they're just made up IP addresses, so use them as you see fit, folks. All right, so just to sort of give you a quick rundown of the code from the top down, we've got a locals block here. This could be put inside a locals.terraform file, folks, but I've just put it in here because this file is quite small and it just makes it a little bit more easier to read. Like I've said, I've commented the life out of it, and the first line there is just finding out where the YAML files are, folks, that passes in the rules. Okay, and then there's a little bit of a for loop here, and it reads through those YAML files, folks, and decodes them for Terraform. So Terraform will look at this YAML file and it will be able to understand it because we're using a little keyword there called YAML decode, and it will look at these here and decode it in a format that it can understand, folks, and that's in a JSON format. And if I really quickly run a Terraform console, which I've already pre-set up, if you run Terraform console, folks, and in this case local.nsg_data, it will actually push out what Terraform actually decodes that YAML file as, folks, and you can see it in a map or a dictionary if you're used to working with Python, and it's key value pairs. All right, so if I minimize that down again, so in this YAML on the right hand side, we can see like a little hyphen here. That's actually representing a list. So it is. So these are all values and like key values in a list, folks. All right, and they're decoded. So this YAML is decoded like this when Terraform runs across it. Runs that little for loop block, this NSG data. So I'm doing local.nsg_data, and then that console is running that little for loop and scraping all the data in that YAML, and that's what it sees. So it's able to pull out those key value pairs then, folks. All right, you will need to initialize Terraform in the actual folder that this nsg.tf is in, folks. So I've changed directory into there and I've ran it from there. So the path is here and it's in module 1, and you're able to run that Terraform console in there. After you run Terraform in it, and you can change things as you need, folks, from there. All right. So after that, folks, there's a resource group as well created here, because all resources in Azure need to live inside a resource group. Then we've got the Terraform network security group block, folks, and it's pulling in as well a local.nsg underscore data for each. So it's looking, at this for loop, and it's pulling in each one of these, files, folks, which are getting decoded. There's two in this case here. We're looking at the staging network security groups. I've put in two custom security groups with custom rules here, folks. So the first one's web tier staging, the next one's API tier staging, and I've got a default one at the bottom here, folks. The default rules in Azure are just a basic setup. If you create a security group with a name and don't create any custom rules in, it'll give you a set of default rules. And I've had to set up an empty list there, folks. Otherwise, it'll throw me an error. I could, in this case, in this for each .value.rules, when it's expecting some values, I could put a try block there, folks. So I could put try and then each .value.rules, comma, and then an empty list like I've done down here. So you could do that and keep it a little bit more cleaner. So if it looks for the rules, there's none there, it'll gracefully move on to the next iteration, folks. Okay, so as we said, resource group getting created. Then we're jumping down into what the dynamic block does, folks. In this case, it's looking at the security rule, and if we remember back to our Terraform documentation, the security rule is what's in the Terraform block, folks, and that's one of the things here that it's looking. It says optional. I found that there's a name that's required, and this actually throws an error if a rule doesn't exist, folks. So hence why I threw it an empty list. Okay, so it's an optional list, it says here. I found that it will actually give you an error there. So you can either put in a little try block around that, each.value.rules, or stick in an empty list in my case here, which seems to work. And if we look down at the actual console output, you can see the rules are going in as an empty rules. So it'll just give you the default value for this network security group -default-rules, like I've named it here, and it'll just be the default rules, okay, when they're pushed into the actual Azure portal. The dynamic security group rule, folks, in this case security_rule, is jumping down into a for each loop here, and it's each.value.rules. So it's looking inside our YAML, which is now in a JSON format that Terraform's able to iterate over, and it's looking for each key and value, folks. In this case, the first one being name, and it looks into under this content here for name, and it'll be security rule .value.name, folks. Okay, so it'll push in the name for that. In this case here, this first one's allow SSH, and that will be what is pushed into the output, folks, and exactly what you're seeing here. So you can see, if you look at for the name, allow SSH, there it is there. And then it'll go through all the rest of them accordingly and build out the Terraform infrastructure that's pushed into the portal. Then I've got a couple of try blocks down here because there was some errors happening with regards to if you don't have these IP addresses in, folks. There's more about that there, why they're needed inside this Terraform documentation for network security groups, and you can go through that there and better understand it. I'll share the link for it. And once we run this, folks, then we will also get a plan output, which is something we're all familiar with there. The Terraform console was something I did recently there. I just wanted to better understand what you can do in Terraform, and it's another useful little tool if you want to run that. I'll just run Control-C here just to break out of this here. I'm going to change into the parent directory because that's where my Terraform is ran from. And if I just change the directory into the parent one, and I've already initialized this, folks, so I'm just going to run Terraform plan and run this up. And this will give me 6 resources, folks, because in this YAML file here, I've got 1, I've got 2, and I've got 3 network security groups, folks. And my other one, I've got 2 network security groups, plus I've got the resource group, folks. So 6 in all. Like it says here, plan 6 to add none to change, none to destroy, because I haven't created anything yet. And there's our output, folks. Very similar to the JSON output, but it's a little bit easier to understand this here in the plan. We can see what's actually going to get created here. So we can, and we can then make a decision on whether to approve this here. So we can see the default one there as well. There's no rules in there, folks. We're just getting a name, location, and obviously the resource group name as well. And the security rules are going to be empty. It says none after apply here. And the other ones, it says security rule, and it's actually got all the values set up there. Okay, so if we run this here just by running Terraform, Terraform apply, I'm just going to run -auto-approve here, because it just saves us having to select yes again. It'll just give us the plan output and then ask us if we want to proceed. But I just want to auto approve that, so that'll allow us to do that. And we'll just let this think about this for a second. I'm already set up with my Azure portal. I'll just jump into that really quickly, pull it off to the side, open my portal up. If you weren't logged in with your Azure portal, folks, what it would ask you to do is register the credentials. So it's just a matter of running AZ login and selecting your subscription accordingly. Okay, and we can see there, folks, now that the 6 added, 0 changed, 0 destroyed. So we can look inside the portal, and those resources will be pushed into that one security resource group called template resource group. Okay, so let's jump in there now. So in our portal here, folks, I'm just going to go to resource groups, template resource group. That's where our security groups are. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, with the 6th resource being the actual resource group itself, folks, which we're in now. Okay, the default rules one, like I said, folks, it'll have default rules already set up automatically by Azure. Okay, if we come back then, look at one of our more custom based ones, we can see then that these custom rules have been placed in here, folks, accordingly by the Terraform configuration using those YAML files. Okay, so network security group API tier staging. If we come back to our code, network security group API tier staging, it's in the other YAML. Network security group API tier staging, it's this one, and these are the rules that's coming in. We should have, in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3. So we've got 1 outbound and 2 inbound, folks. If we go back, there we go, 1 outbound and 2 inbound, folks. Okay, and that's one way of using a Terraform tool like dynamic resource blocks, folks. You could, configure this in multiple different ways, complicated ways, simpler ways. If you think you can do it, folks, please share examples. It's a really good thing to reuse the module, folks, to be able to allow another team to come in and create a rule if they need to without having a really thorough understanding of Terraform. For example, if they wanted to create more network security rules and keep them under a specific name, possibly a development environment, then they could create another file under this data folder here and then set up similar blocks here. I've put in a markdown file here to actually describe how this is all put together. So if someone reads that, they've got a nice README file there, and they can understand then how to do this with minimal help from your DevOps team, or if they need any help, it'll be minimal coaching to say this is how it works, this is what you need to do. So you can do this here across your infrastructure, folks, and keep things running nice and smoothly and control everything. And if you need to update or remove anything, you can do that there. Come in here and remove things quite easily. Okay, and if you've got any questions, folks, please drop them in there. I'm always happy to add things to this if it better explains it, or look at other ways other people have done it. But I leave this one with you. As always, wish you all the best. Take care and good luck.